Hi guys, in today's video we're going to discuss In-N-Out Burger, and more specifically I'm going to summarize this book about the company. It's written by Stacy Perman and it's a very long book. It goes into the history of the company in incredible detail, and we'll touch on some of that. But what I really want to pull out in this video is what makes In-N-Out such an outstanding business in the food retail industry. It's an outstanding company in two ways. I think one, optically, it looks so different to anything else out there. It looks really different to McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, and all these other players. So there's something about In-N-Out, something we should probably dig into. And secondly, probably most importantly, is on a per store basis, it outsells these other players. So In-N-Out's doing something different. We're going to find out what that is. But before we get into the bulk of the summary, I just want to say I'm not affiliated with the company in any way, nor any other company that I mentioned in this video. This is just a book summary. I'm a big fan of In-N-Out. I've eaten there a few times, but I'm not a promoter of the company. In-N-Out was founded in 1948 in California, right outside of Los Angeles. And it was around the time when America was going through a very important growth period. It was the post-war economic boom. Money was everywhere apparently, and things were great. People were optimistic, which is great for business. But more importantly than that, there were two big prevailing trends that really favored a fast food retail revolution. One of these trends was motorization. So car ownership took off essentially. People were leading more mobile lifestyles. They were commuting to work, traveling in their own little pod to meet friends and family, etc. Very often they needed food on the go. And the second big trend was that women were entering the workplace in increasing numbers every year. So what this meant is that there was less food preparation taking place at home, and more eating occasions took place outside the house or via a takeout service. But what I got to stress is that In-N-Out was only one of many players in the industry. It had to kind of differentiate itself in its early days. We're going to find out how they did that. In-N-Out found its operating philosophy in the following three things: quality, service, and cleanliness. We can call them QSC. And how they focused on this is as follows. So for quality, they focused on fresh food over frozen food. And they had to make sure there were a few steps as possible between ground and burger for a lot of their ingredients. In terms of service, it's a very strict dress code. Employees had to wear white shirts, for instance. Every burger was also made to order. And there was a certain art to burger making at In-N-Out, an order in which things had to be placed inside the burger and salt had to be shaken from shoulder height for proper distribution of salt. There was also, in terms of cleanliness, an open kitchen and really high standards in place, and these were set from above, so managers would really actively be involved in cleaning the stores. Now, other players in the market were not as defined as this. This is pretty special. But on the other side of the industry, on the other side of the spectrum, you have players focusing on these three things: speed, volume, and price. And what this meant was adopting machines, using a lot of preservatives, using a lot of frozen food that you can transport in huge volumes. And some operators even resorted to putting holes in burgers so that they can cook quicker and get to the customers a lot quicker, and not to mention cheaper. They use big changing menus as well to draw people into the store all the time. These six things I think you can call the six pillars of the retail industry. In-N-Out focused on the things on the left, the most of the industry focused on things on the right. That includes McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, all these other players. You'll see that In-N-Out's growth and competitive advantage was very much a function of them being able to focus on strategies that help them get better at things that are on the left hand side of this paper, QSC. So we now see how In-N-Out was diverging from the rest of the industry, and we have a rough map of the industry. Now let's talk about In-N-Out's growth. The company began to expand in 1951, a full 3 years after it was founded, and it did so without taking on debt. And to elaborate more on the growth story, it reached 7 units by 1960. All of them were paid for from retained cash. This was a big restriction on growth, and another big restriction on growth was management talent. So In-N-Out wanted to promote from within. They'd only create another store if there was someone available from a current store who could go and manage that store. They wanted to promote from within and show people that they had the opportunity to become a store manager. Now, what's strange is that the rest of the industry took off in the 1950s and 60s. They loaded up on debt, they went public and raised loads of money and expanded aggressively across the US using a franchising strategy. And this played really well to volume, speed, and price because you needed scale to be really good at those three factors. And if you could grow nationally really quickly with not much extra capital via franchising, that was a great thing to do. In-N-Out did not play that game at all. In-N-Out's disciplined growth meant a few things for the company. Importantly, it meant that complexity was very low. They didn't have the interests of shareholders, bondholders, franchisees interfering with their business operations. So business was very easy for In-N-Out. They could just focus on what they did best, didn't have to answer to anyone outside the company, and that kept things in check overall. But growth wasn't all so mundane. They did do a few things to make sure people were coming into the restaurant in increasing numbers, and that they were actually making more restaurants. So one thing they did is that they centralized some food preparation using commissaries. So a commissary would deal with some aspects of food preparation, and then there'll be vehicles just driving it out to nearby restaurants, and the food can then go from the kitchen and then into the customer's burger pretty easily. But it very much played to quality, service, and cleanliness. It was an added control on quality. They did also have some cookout trailers, In-N-Out cookout trailers that went up and down California and visited, stadiums and social parties and things like that. And they were essentially moving billboards for the company. And finally, they did think carefully about where they set up their business. Their next restaurants were all in very high traffic areas, normally off motorways. So they did think carefully about growth. And although it might not seem it, it was a very good strategy. It worked very well. This mundane growth saved In-N-Out. And you'll notice that when we start talking about In-N-Out's competitive edge. Competitive advantage is all about differentiation and barriers to entry. We already saw how In-N-Out was slightly differentiated from the rest of the industry through its unusual operating philosophy that took a lot of discipline and controlled growth to nurture. But its competitive advantage developed in two ways. One, through the actions of others in the industry, and two, as a result of its own actions. So let's have a think about what the others in the industry were doing. So in the 1950s and the 1960s, a lot of players in the industry raised a lot of cash and expanded nationally across the US via a franchising model. And this involved a few things. You had to do certain things in order to expand in this way. One was moving from fresh food to frozen, from people to machines, and cutting costs, as well as having large and ever-changing menus. And if you were to, square In-N-Out up against this in like a checklist approach, you'll see that In-N-Out actually did none of these things. Cross. In-N-Out stuck to what it knew best. It stuck to things that would help it focus on QSC. These things are really easy to do. In-N-Out could have done them, but they didn't, and it worked out really well for In-N-Out in the end. In-N-Out basically stuck to what they had been doing. A very simple menu, very slow growth. They adopted some technology. They adopted electric grills instead of gas grills, but they found strength in sticking to their core operating philosophy. In-N-Out essentially were playing their own game, and this became really important in the 1970s when economic growth slowed. It turned out that the industry had overexpanded, they'd overbuilt. There was all this capital at stake now, and there were fewer customers coming into the stores, and it resulted in a lot of fighting for customers. So essentially these players were now slashing prices, expanding their menus, offering loads of special promotions just to get customers through the door. And these are all the characteristics of a race to the bottom. In-N-Out was completely removed from this game by focusing on its operating philosophy. It was very well insulated. Now let's look at what In-N-Out did themselves, the actions they took themselves. They really focused it on quality, service, and cleanliness. In terms of quality, they paid top dollar for all their food so that they could ensure that they had the best. They treated their suppliers really well. They opened up commissaries in order to have an extra control on food preparation. And in terms of service and cleanliness, a lot of this came from investment in staff. Staff were very well paid, had great perks, They had a university to go to, like In-N-Out University. They had latitude in their decision making, and there was a lot of opportunities for internal promotion to manager positions. This all created a fascinating system. In this system, investment led to a better company. A better company led to more fulfilled staff. More fulfilled staff led to a better company, and it sort of reinforced itself. And around it, as I've shown here in a red dotted line, was a special culture of employee empowerment, which is really difficult to replicate. With the system being self-reinforcing and guarded by something as nuanced as culture, a potential entrant would really struggle to go in and copy what In-N-Out has done. They'd have to be relentlessly consistent and have deep enough pockets in order to finance similar investments in QSC factors. And the fact of the matter is that In-N-Out, in its local market, in its niche in California, was bigger than any potential entrant. So if In-N-Out were to invest X% of their revenue into QSC factors, that would result in a dollar amount that would be a greater than X% for revenues of a potential entrant. You can see that In-N-Out had an advantage in its local market through actions that they had taken themselves, and on a national scale they sort of gained their competitive advantage as a result of not following the actions of others. I would argue that the local market competitive advantage is really where In-N-Out's business really sits. It's not trying to be a national player, but if a national player was set up in a local neighborhood, you could bet that an In-N-Out store would be outperforming it. So I think we hit all the big points there. We've seen how In-N-Out was founded. We saw how it started to differentiate itself. We understand now how it's grown. And we also saw how its competitive advantage was being formed. Now, let's take a minute to step back and think about the big three key things we can learn from this story. One big lesson I've learned from this book is that if you have something special to protect, something intangible, something that takes a lot of investment and nurturing over the long term to get right, to get it performing really well, focus on that instead of going and playing the games that the rest of the industry are doing. It's really easy to think, okay, we can cut costs, etc. Yeah, it might harm my brand, but next quarter's profits are going to be really good. Next year's profits will be even better, and things like that. But once you do that and you follow the rest of the industry, you're playing their game now, and the outcomes are pretty much out of your control when things hit the rocks. As we saw with the fast food wars in the 1970s, it's not a good position to be in. The second lesson that I've taken away from this book is that there are pillars to the fast food retail industry, and I'm now going to be thinking about industries and pillars a lot more. It just opens up a new way of thinking, and you can appreciate the fact that there might be multiple industry leaders within one industry. It's often argued that public ownership of a company or loading a company up with debt increases accountability and forces a company to really think carefully about performance. Now, I think this applies really well to businesses that rely on having low costs and businesses that operate on tangible factors like financial factors, etc. But I don't think it works very well for a business that relies on intangible factors to be doing really well. Essentially factors that require long-term attention. Having outside interests and from people who have short-term decision horizons is not the most consistent way to run your business. Instead, I feel like if you're relying on intangible factors, etc., your discipline comes from close control, keeping the business as simple as possible. So that about sums it up. I've actually written a book summary for this book in a PDF format that you guys at home can just refer to really quickly and easily. Summarizes what we talked about here, fleshes out a few things. It's got some quotes in there. It's a 2-pager, really easy to digest, bullet pointed, etc. I encourage you guys to check that out.